Now, within your organization, you'll think, well, what about the compliance part, right? So the two pieces, the internal compliance and the external compliance. Internal compliance is, many organizations do it, right? So the IT organization has different policies, different rules, and you have to comply with that. That's what we're referring for internal compliance. Couple of examples that relate to open source security is one, well, a guidance or a compliance is to stay on the or be on the latest releases, the latest updates and patches, which of course that will address vulnerabilities. So you meet compliance if you are on the latest versions of latest releases. That sounds easy, right? I mean, of course, it's easier said than done, but that's if you want to pass compliance or if you want to establish that type of policy in your organization. Many organizations are doing it. Makes all the sense on the world to be on the latest versions. Now, some of you might think, well, look, in reality, it's really much harder to do an upgrade than, you have to test and, you don't want to touch your production application. I know, right? It's not that easy, right? But, obviously the recommendation is to, test it in pre-production, make sure everything works, focus on that. So at the end of the day, your organization, your software, it's safer. Other check on internal compliance could be, don't be on end-of-life software, right? Not having end-of-life software, right? So make sure that you check that box as well. Another aspect is having external technical support. There's some type of internal compliance or internal policy that says all the software we should have some formal technical support for that software, right? And that makes sense. That also will help you with security, not only security, but also the expertise aspect, right? Having the support from some other professionals on areas that you might not know, right? And again, because open source is growing so much, there's so much to learn, there's so much that we don't know, right? And another piece will be the appropriate open source licensing. That's when you are publishing, especially when you're publishing or commercializing software, you want to make sure that all your components have the proper licensing. Now, with external regulation compliance, I left a little bit more text because I wanted you to read the actual exact sentence from those regulations, just as an example. So, for example, on the PSI DSS requirement, PSI for like credit card transactions and things like that. Well, there's specific mention there are requirement 6 for vendor supply security patches, right? So you have to have the security or apply the security patches. Another is the CIS controls. There's CIS benchmarks and there are CIS controls. There are a couple of points there, the 2.2 and 16.4. One talking about the only current supported software, right? So you have to have only supported software. The other one talks about, well, in similar terms, that components still are supported, meaning they are not end of life, right? So going back to what I was mentioning earlier. A few more examples here. Obviously the ISO that it talks about that identifying the risks associated with unsupported software. Again, unsupported software meaning either it's open source that no one is supporting, like officially supporting, commercially supporting, or it's end of life in the project, no one is supporting that, right? FedRAMP for the US federal government, they talk about no longer components that are no longer available for the developer. Again, relating to end of life, older versions of the software. And then there's the HIPAA security rule that talks about protection against malicious software and includes updated patches in all systems, right? So the compliance is make sure that you are up to date on patches. These are just a few examples. Here's one more, the ISO, what is also called the Open Chain standard about OSS compliance. It talks about or covers the proper open source licensing. Also talks about that you should have documented processes to handle open source software, verification of software bill of materials, and promoting the engagement collaboration with open source communities, open source projects and open source communities.